not too many years ago, I was 6 foot tall. But I shrink. Another thing I'd like to just share with you, the reason Betty has accompanied me to these talks when I'm invited, is that I have a philosophy that you have come here to hear something about Bataan and the prisoner of war. And I want you to know that if I were to have a heart attack, or right now, she could come right up and finish right where I left. You will not be deprived anyway. The month of August is a very important month, and so when I was asked to speak today, my first thought was, gee, it's August, and that's a wonderful month for me. You know, also I want you to be aware of the fact that I watch the audience completely. I watch to see if you start looking at your watch. If you start looking at your watch, you both probably want to know what time it is. That's not true. You look at your watch to find out what time it isn't. You know, I have an appointment at 5 o'clock. It's not 5 o'clock. That's how you find out. That doesn't bother me at all, folks. I mean, just not at all. I understand. What does bother me is if you take the watch off and start to shake it. But you don't have any problem, because I'm an older man and I take diuretics. And my diuretics last until about 1:30. So you don't have to worry. I can eat on my own. Yeah, going back to the month of August. August is important. Many things have happened to me in August. And to you. And certainly to history. August 6th was the first atomic bomb that dropped on Japan. On August 8th, the second atomic bomb in Nagasaki. I was only 30 miles from there, so I was a witness to the atomic bomb. I didn't know what it was, but I did see the cloud rise, and I understood that there was a devastation because the civilians in the coal mine told me that. Another important thing happened on August 8th. Russia declared war against Japan. Now that doesn't sound like a big thing, but that may have been the exact reason why the war came to an end the following week. And I mean that very seriously. When I'm asked the question, when I visit, I'm invited to Japan on a number of occasions to speak to university students. One of the questions I'm always asked has to do with the atomic bomb. My answer is this, and I want you to share this. If it wasn't for the atomic bomb, you would be speaking Russian today. And that really is my philosophy about how Russia entered the war and what it did as far as the war is concerned. August 15th, another very important day for me. That was the day that we were told in Japan that America and Japan are now friends. That's how we were told. So many things happened in August, as far as I was concerned. And you know, from April 9th of 1942, when Bataan was surrendered by the American forces, until August 15th of 1945, many, many things happened in those 3.5 years. And so I'd like to share with you a few of those things. Number one, as you most probably know, right after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese came into the Philippines. And they started to bomb the strait. They expected to be finished with the Philippines in 54 days. Instead, it took 4.5 months just for Bataan. Corregidor surrendered 1 month later. But what happened was, on Bataan, on April 9th, when I had to witness the Japanese remove our American flag, spit on it, curse it, and urinate on it, I cried. I cried tears of sorrow. On August 16th of 1945, American B-29s came over my camp in Japan. They dropped food, medical supplies, but they also dropped an American flag. And we stood at attention, and tears came to our eyes. But those tears were tears of joy compared to the tears that fell on April 9th of 1942. So many things happened between those years. Right after April 9th of 1942, we continued to fight from December 7th until April 9th. We fought the Japanese night and day. On the 3rd of April, the Japanese decided to have an all-out offensive against the Americans. What they did was they brought all their equipment Admiral Yamagata, who was on his way to Australia, was brought back into the Philippines to capture the Philippines. That was an all-out important thing for them. Now, ladies and gentlemen, think of this, please. On Bataan, we had 12,000 Americans, 54,000 Filipinos. Bataan is a peninsula surrounded on 3 sides by water, and the one side was 54,000 Japanese troops. If they did nothing, we would have surrendered or died within 3 months. But no, they had to save face. And so they came in all their forces on April 3rd and started their tremendous push down. By April 9th, General King said, "I cannot allow the infusion of blood to continue." And in spite of General MacArthur, General King surrendered all the forces on Bataan. General MacArthur gave instructions on April 8th. His instructions were very simple. This command will not surrender. If all else fails, you will charge the enemy. General King took it upon himself to disobey General MacArthur's order because he could not allow his men to suffer that way. Little did any of them know that had we known afterwards what we would have gone through, maybe many of us would just have preferred to fight till the end as MacArthur wanted. Now, right after April 9th, what happened was the Bataan Death March. It was called a Death March. Let me share with you why. It was called a Death March because of the way people died, not just how many. We started with 12,000 Americans. Only 1,700 lived to come home. Of all the Americans captured by the Japanese, 23,000 from the Philippines, 40% of them were killed as POWs. So you see, it was not a very pleasant situation. The Japanese believed that if you surrendered, you were a coward. You were lower than a dog. And they told us in no uncertain terms that that's the way they would treat us. Lower than a dog. And that's what they tried to do for the 3.5 years that we were prisoners. So, the Bataan Death March, the first 4 days, no food, no water, temperatures about 108, 110 degrees, walking, not marching, but walking. We could not march. You know, the American public doesn't understand that for the last 2 months of fighting, we were eating iguanas, monkeys, and snakes. Our food was gone. Our medical supplies were gone. We were just fighting because we were told to fight. So when we were captured on April 9th, of the 12,000 men, I can guarantee that 8,000 had malaria. And another 4,000 at least had gunshot wounds, bayonet wounds, or shrapnel wounds. We were not prepared to march, but we did. 4 days. One of those 4 days, I was on the end of the line. Japanese soldiers came by on horseback, swinging their samurai sword. They were trying to cut necks off, anything they could. They were laughing. They had fun. They hit me across the back with the sword, right down my left side. They missed the neck, but hit me down the back. And so my buddy brought up a medic from the rear end to sew me up with needle and thread until I was able to continue walking. But my friend would not let me fall down because falling down meant dead. If you stopped marching, you were killed. If you had to defecate, you were killed. If you had a pain and had to stop, you were killed. And how did they kill you? They bayonet you, shoot you, or decapitate you. And so when people say to me, what was the worst thing you had to survive, or what you had to do on the march, my answer was very simple. The worst thing for me was watching my buddies die and not being able to do a thing about it. Because if you tried to interfere, you were killed also. And so out of 12,000 Americans, 1,700 survived to come back 3.5 years later. Now, if you were able to march, and if you were able to survive the Bataan March, the next thing was to move from the Philippines to Japan in a ship that was unmarked. These were called hell ships. We were put, I have to talk about myself. I was put in the hold of a ship with 500 Americans. We were in the hold of that ship with one ration of rice and 1 cup of water a day. The temperature in the hold had reached at least 120. We were lucky. We were one of the first ships over. but each ship after us was bombed or torpedoed by Americans. Why? Because the Japanese refused to put POW or Red Cross markings on the ships. Of the ships that were sunk, 23 of them were sunk by Americans. Of the 23 sunk, only about 6,000 of the Americans survived the sinking. The others were drowned. Now, if you're able to survive the march, able to survive the move to Japan, we then got into Japan and we were sold into slavery by the Japanese military, into private companies. Again, for me, I was sold to Mitsui Mining Company. I worked in a coal mine. I shoveled coal 3 years, every 12 hours a day, every day for 3 years. You could get out of work only 2 ways, either being sick or being hurt. If you were sick, you got half rations. If you got hurt in the coal mine, you got full rations. So my broken hand, my broken arm, my broken bones, and all the rest of our broken bones were always made sure that we had it in the coal mine. So that at least when we got back to camp, we would get full rations. A broken hand was out for 3 days. A broken foot was out for 5 days. A broken leg was out for a week. We had certain levels that we knew what we could do. I was listening to a few of the comments here. I had a laugh when I realized that we also had a bankruptcy court in prison camp in Japan. You see, what could you do with a ration of rice if you don't feel good that day? You can't save it. You only do one thing with it. Trade it to somebody else for a ration a day or a week or a month later. Of course, when the time came for you to get that ration, that man that owed you the ration also owned 5 or 6 others. So you'd take them out the back and beat them. But that wasn't the solving it. You had to get that ration of rice. And so, to stop the beatings, we developed a bankruptcy court. The only difference between the bankruptcy court in prison camp and the bankruptcy court that you're familiar with is that every man had to pay back every ration he owed. But he had to do it only 1 ration a day so that the man wouldn't die.